Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused about what just happened, like reality shifted under your feet, but you can't explain how? That feeling has a name, and understanding it might be one of the most important things you ever do. Today, we're going deep into the psychology of gaslighting. Not just what it is, but what it actually does to your brain, the neuroscience behind it, why it works, and why it's so much harder to escape than people think. Stay until the end, because the last thing I'm going to tell you is the part most people never hear. What is gaslighting exactly? The term comes from a 1944 film called Gaslight, in which a husband slowly manipulates his wife into believing she's losing her mind, dimming the gaslights in their home, then denying they've changed at all. But gaslighting isn't just a film trope, it's a documented psychological phenomenon. Researchers define it as a form of psychological manipulation in which a person causes someone to question their own memory, perception, and sanity. And here's what makes it different from ordinary lying. It doesn't just deceive you about facts, it makes you doubt the tool you use to detect deception, your own mind. How gaslighting works on your brain. When you experience something and someone immediately tells you it didn't happen, or that you imagined it, or that you're overreacting, your brain enters a state of cognitive conflict. You have two competing inputs, what your senses and memory are telling you, and what another person, often someone you trust, is telling you. Your brain has to resolve that conflict somehow. Here's where it gets dangerous. When that conflict is repeated over and over, the brain begins to update its internal model, not because the gaslighter is right, but because the brain is wired to reduce dissonance. And the easiest way to do that is to question the source of the conflict, which is you. Neuroscientists have found that chronic interpersonal stress, exactly the kind produced by sustained gaslighting, affects the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory consolidation and contextual recall. The more stressed and destabilized you are, the less reliable your memory becomes. And the less reliable your memory becomes, the easier it is for a gaslighter to convince you that you're imagining things. It's a self-reinforcing loop. The manipulation creates the very cognitive impairment it exploits. The 4 stages of gaslighting. Psychologists who study abusive relationships have identified a pattern that tends to unfold in stages. Stage 1 is disbelief. The gaslighting begins and you dismiss it. You think, this person must have misremembered. Or maybe I did get confused. It doesn't feel like a pattern yet. Stage 2 is defense. The incidents accumulate, and you start trying to prove yourself. You keep records. You replay conversations. You look for evidence that you're not imagining things. This is actually a healthy instinct, but it's also exhausting. Stage 3 is depression. At some point, the effort of constant self-defense becomes too heavy. You start to feel like something is genuinely wrong with you. Anxiety, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion set in. You begin to rely on the gaslighter's version of events not because you believe them, but because it's easier than fighting. Stage 4 is acceptance. This is the most dangerous stage. The person being gaslit has internalized the narrative. They genuinely believe their memory and perception are faulty. They apologize for things they didn't do. They seek the gaslighter's approval before trusting their own judgment. At this stage, leaving the relationship becomes extraordinarily difficult because the victim has lost the internal compass that would tell them something is wrong. Why smart people are not immune. One of the most persistent myths about gaslighting is that it only works on people who are naive, weak, or mentally vulnerable. The research doesn't support that. Gaslighting is most effective on people who are empathetic, self-reflective, and conscientious. Why? Because those are exactly the qualities that make you willing to question yourself. If you're the kind of person who takes other people's feelings seriously, who considers the possibility that you might be wrong, who tries to see situations from multiple perspectives, a gaslighter can weaponize all of that against you. Your empathy becomes the mechanism of your own manipulation. the language of gaslighting. Gaslighting has a recognizable vocabulary. Once you know it, you'll start hearing it clearly. You're too sensitive. This one invalidates your emotional response without addressing what caused it. It makes your feelings the problem, not the behavior that triggered them. That never happened. A direct denial of documented reality, often said with absolute confidence, which is itself a manipulation tactic. Certainty is disorienting when you're already doubting yourself. You're imagining things. Similar to the above, but with an additional implication that there's something wrong with your perception. Everyone thinks you overreact. This introduces triangulation. Suddenly your response isn't just questioned by one person, but supposedly by a whole social consensus that you can't verify. I was just joking. You can't take a joke. This one reframes the original comment as harmless, while making you responsible for the damage it caused. You always do this. The word always is doing a lot of work here. It's a generalization designed to make a specific incident seem like evidence of a persistent character flaw. How to recognize it in real time. The hardest part about gaslighting is that by the time you recognize it, it's often already working. But there are signals to watch for. You feel consistently confused after conversations with a specific person. Not just occasionally, consistently. You find yourself apologizing frequently without being sure what you did wrong. You feel worse about yourself the more time you spend with this person. You've stopped trusting your own memories and started deferring to their version of events. You feel like you're walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring your behavior to avoid triggering a reaction. Any one of these in isolation might have another explanation, but if several of them are present together in relation to one specific person, that pattern is worth taking seriously. What actually helps? The most important thing you can do when you suspect you're being gaslit is to create an external record of reality. Write things down, not to build a legal case, but to give your memory a fixed point. When someone later tells you something didn't happen, you have something to return to that isn't filtered through weeks of psychological pressure. Talk to people outside the relationship. A gaslighter's power depends partly on isolation. The more you can verify your experiences with trusted people who are outside the dynamic, the harder it is for the manipulation to take hold. Trust your emotional response as data. You don't need to prove that an event happened a certain way before you're allowed to feel how you feel about it. Your emotional response is information. Treat it as such. And if you're experiencing the later stages, persistent self-doubt, anxiety, difficulty trusting your own perceptions, speaking to a therapist who understands coercive control can make a significant difference. These patterns are reversible, but they rarely reverse on their own. Gaslighting isn't always intentional. Some people do it because it was done to them. Some do it unconsciously as a defensive mechanism. That doesn't make it less harmful, but it does mean that recognizing the pattern in someone's behavior isn't the same as condemning them as a person. What it does mean is that you're allowed to protect yourself from it, regardless of intent. Your perception of reality matters, your memory matters, your emotional experience matters. And if someone in your life is consistently making you doubt all three, that is not a relationship dynamic you have to accept. If this video helped you understand something you've been trying to put into words, subscribe. Every week we go deep into the psychology behind the patterns that shape how people think, influence, and control. The next video is one you won't want to miss. I'll see you there.